The late summer heat hung heavy in the air as Malik Carter stepped out of his front door. The sun pressed down on his shoulders like an iron plate, hot enough to make him squint as he glanced up the street. His mind was clear, focused on one simple task. Head over to Lee's Corner Mart, grab a bottle of Gatorade, and make it back before his mom checked in. 10 minutes tops. That was all the time he needed. And Malik wasn't the kind of kid to waste time standing around outside, especially not his neighborhood. Not because it was dangerous, but because people looked at him differently. 16 years old, black, living in a suburb where most of his classmates at Fairfield High came from different worlds, where the sidewalks were wider, the lawns greener, and the cops friendlier. Malik had learned early how to move through that world. Keep your hands visible. Don't linger. Don't run. Never give them a reason. He walked fast, his sneakers tapping against the cracked pavement. Sweat was already sliding down his back as he reached the corner store. A dingy little place squeezed between a laundromat and a closed-up pizza shop. The faded sign above the door read, Lee's Corner Mart, the paint peeling in the corners. But the second Malik stepped inside, he felt a rush of cool air hit him in the face, sharp and refreshing. A small relief. The store smelled like burnt coffee and old newspapers. Narrow aisles packed tight with shelves of chips, soda bottles, and dusty candy. Behind the counter sat Mr. Lee, squinting at a crossword puzzle through his glasses. He didn't even glance up, but someone else did. A white guy in a polo shirt stood near the register, arms crossed tight over his chest. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something sour as his eyes flicked down the aisle. Malik clocked him without slowing down. He knew the look. Suspicious. Tight. Like he was waiting for someone to do something wrong. Malik didn't give him the satisfaction. He made a beeline for the drinks cooler at the back of the store, tugged open the heavy glass door, and grabbed a blue Gatorade. He could already imagine the cool sweetness on his tongue as he turned toward the counter. Then something caught his eye. A flash of motion in the candy aisle. A guy, maybe a few years older than him, wearing a black hoodie despite the heat. He was moving fast, shoving candy bars and packets of gum into his pockets, glancing toward the front door like he was about to bolt. Malik's brain barely had time to process it before the guy was gone. The door flew open with a sharp electronic chime, and a split second later, the alarm blared. Malik froze. Mr. Lee jerked upright. The guy in the polo shirt whipped around toward the door, and then, just as quick, his eyes landed on Malik. You, he barked. Malik's stomach flipped. What? The man was already moving toward him. Fast. His hand snapped out, grabbing Malik by the arm. His grip was rough, squeezing tight enough to make Malik wince. Let me go. Malik jerked back, trying to pull free. But the man didn't budge. Don't move, he growled. With his free hand, he reached toward his belt. And that's when Malik saw it. A badge clipped to his belt. And handcuffs. An off-duty cop. A cold shock washed over Malik, freezing him in place. That guy ran that way, Malik said quickly, jerking his chin toward the door. That wasn't me. But the cop wasn't listening. He shoved Malik against the counter, twisting his arms behind his back. You think you're slick, the man muttered. I didn't do anything. Malik's words came out sharp, panicked. Click. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, the cold metal biting into his skin. A couple of customers stared, one whispering to another. Somebody pulled out a phone, but no one stepped in. The siren's wail was faint at first, getting closer. Malik's legs locked up. His heart thundered in his ears. 1 minute he'd been on his way to get a drink. Now he was cuffed. His world flipped upside down, and nobody cared to hear his side of the story. The ride to the police station was silent. Malik sat stiffly in the back seat, his wrists aching where the cuffs dug in too tight. His heart wouldn't slow down. The cop driving, Detective Greg Voss, according to his badge, hadn't said much after slamming the cruiser door. He just radioed in, juvenile suspect in custody. Then he kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. Malik wanted to scream, to shout the truth. But deep down, something told him it wouldn't matter. The station was an ugly gray building with no windows. The inside smelled like sweat and old paperwork. As soon as Malik stepped through the door, another officer grabbed him by the arm and steered him through a maze of desks and ringing phones. His sneakers squeaked on the linoleum. They led him to a holding area. Behind a desk sat Sergeant Tom Anders, a heavy-set guy with a receding hairline. He barely glanced up. Shoplifting? Anders asked, bored. Got him at Lee's Corner Mart, Voss said. Owner didn't see the act, but he was the only one near the shelves when the alarm went off. That's not true, Malik said quickly. I was. Voss squeezed his shoulder, hard enough to make Malik shut up. Fits the description, Voss added with a shrug. Description. Malik's stomach flipped again. The other guy had been wearing all black and a hoodie. Malik had on a gray t-shirt and red basketball shorts. But none of that seemed to matter. Anders scribbled something on his clipboard. Take him to processing. The next hour was a blur. Mugshots. Fingerprints. A form he had to sign with trembling hands. Juvenile detention pending arraignment printed in bold letters. Malik stared at it like it was in another language. Finally, they led him to a holding room. Just a plain space with a cold metal bench and a few other kids slumped against the walls. Nobody spoke. Malik sat stiffly, wrists now zip-tied in front of him. He stared at his hands. They felt numb. An hour passed. Maybe two. Would his mom even know where he was? She worked late most nights as it was. If she called his phone, it'd go straight to voicemail. Would she think he was hanging out with friends? Would she worry? The door creaked open. A man in a wrinkled suit stepped inside. He looked tired, maybe 30-something, his tie crooked. He flipped through a thin file. Malik Carter? Malik nodded slowly. Yeah. The man sat down beside him, tapping his pen against the folder. I'm your public defender, he said. Name's Kevin Price. You've been charged with shoplifting and resisting arrest. Malik's throat went dry. That's not. I'm here to represent you at the arraignment. Price cut in. Your hearing's first thing in the morning. Morning, Malik echoed. They were keeping him overnight? His stomach twisted. I didn't do anything. Price sighed. That's what they all say. Malik barely slept. The bench was hard. His back ached. His head throbbed. Every time he closed his eyes, the scene replayed. The cuffs, the panic, the flashing lights. By morning, they came for him. Let's go, Carter, an officer barked. They zip-tied his hands again. Tighter this time. He could barely feel his fingers. Price walked beside him, flipping through his notes like he was cramming for an exam. Malik's stomach churned. The courtroom was stale and cold. Rows of wooden benches. A few scattered people with blank faces. At the front sat the judge's bench, high and imposing like something out of a movie. And then there was the judge. Judge Samuel Barron. Price had muttered the name earlier like it was a curse. And now Malik understood why. Barron was an older white man with sharp eyes and thin lips. His black robe was spotless, pressed to perfection. His gavel rested on the bench like it already knew the outcome. Malik's mouth felt dry. The prosecutor, a young guy in a tight suit, shuffled his papers. Your Honor, he began. The defendant was apprehended at the scene of a shoplifting incident. The store alarm was triggered, and the arresting officer witnessed the suspect attempting to flee. That's a lie, Malik blurted. Price gripped his arm. Don't talk, he whispered sharply. Barron barely spared Malik a glance. Does the prosecution have video evidence? The prosecutor hesitated. There is surveillance footage, but it has not yet been reviewed. Then we proceed without it, Barron said. Price cleared his throat. Your Honor, I request we postpone until the footage can be reviewed. Barron waved him off. The defendant was in the immediate vicinity. He resisted arrest. There is sufficient cause to proceed. Malik felt his legs weaken. And then came the worst part. Given the defendant's age, the prosecutor said, the state recommends he be tried as an adult. Malik's breath caught. Adult court? That meant real prison. A felony record. His entire future gone. Price tried to argue. My client is 16, no prior record. Barron shook his head. We need to send a message. Malik scanned the room. No sign of his mom. She didn't even know where he was. But then Price leaned in. Do you have any family to call? Malik's lips parted. They had no idea. His voice was hoarse but steady. My mom is the U.S. Attorney General. The officer holding him froze. The prosecutor's pen stopped mid-stroke. Judge Barron's fingers clenched the bench a little tighter. You expect me to believe that? Barron said slowly. I expect to make my phone call, Malik replied. More silence. Finally, Barron barked, take him a holding. Verify his claims. 20 minutes later, Malik sat in a small room. Across from him, an officer spoke quietly into the phone. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Attorney General Carter. Yes, he's safe. He hung up. She's on her way. Malik exhaled. He sat back, his fingers still stinging from the ties. But he didn't care. Outside the room, the courthouse buzzed. Conversations changed. Whispers spread. They realized who they'd railroaded. And now, they were scrambling. And then she arrived. Heels clicked sharply on the floor. Doors swung open. Angela Carter, his mom, stepped into the building like a storm. Angela's voice was razor-sharp. Why was my son denied due process? Barron didn't stand, didn't flinch, but his knuckles whitened. There was cause, Barron began. Angela cut him off. Did you review the footage before setting bail at $10,000? Silence. My son, she continued, a minor, was detained without evidence. Denied access to his guardian. Processed without proper review. This isn't an arrest. This is a violation. She tore through their defense like tissue paper. The prosecutor crumbled first. Then the bailiff rushed to release Malik. Papers were signed in a blur. Judge Barron said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. By evening, Malik stood on the courthouse steps. Free. Angela rested her hand on his shoulder. This was never about you, she said. It was about what they thought you were. He knew she was right. They only stopped because they were afraid of who was watching. And next time, maybe no one would be. Aftermath. Judge Barron's courtroom was under federal review within weeks. Cases were reopened. His record scrutinized. He lost everything, because power only bows to power. But the real fight? Making sure no other kid stands alone. If you believe stories like Malik's need to be told, subscribe. Because the more eyes on the truth, the harder it is for injustice to hide.